What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. And today I'm going to be talking about MKBHD's blind camera test and just what it means, what the results mean, and what I think about them. Usually I don't make these kind of, this is not a reaction video, just my thoughts videos on other people's stuff because really I kind of find it pointless. But this is something so interesting that I can't resist myself. The results really surprised me and I did not expect any of it. So without wasting any more time, I'm going to, by the way, link Marques' video up here somewhere. If you haven't watched it yet, I definitely recommend watching it because he did something which really, I think, shook up the entire system here. What he did was he took 16 different smartphones, all of them that have come out mostly this year or late last year, and he pitted them against each other in a blind camera test, bracket style. Now, these phones, they went head-to-head. Each round was an elimination round. Whichever got the most votes moved on. So that's how it went. Now, one thing I'd like to note right off the bat, the scenarios that the phones were tested in, they were well lit. It was still photography, and it was of one subject, either Marques. There was a backpack in one scenario. There was a bottle of hot sauce, and it was a very, I would say, rather unchallenging test for most cameras because it was a single subject and there wasn't too much to get into the sensor. Yes, there were challenging situations with the dynamic range where there were a lot of contrasting objects in the background and stuff like that. And before I get into spewing off all these terms, let me explain some things to you. So some things Marques said in the video, white balance. What white balance means is that when you look at white, does the white look bluish or yellowish? So white has tints. So there's just not like a pure white. There's white that's kind of bluish, white that's kind of yellowish. Some cameras tend to be yellowish, which they call warm, and some tend to be cooler, which is blue. So some of these cameras have blue tints, some of them have yellow tints, which is warm and cool. Now, each person differs based on what they like, if they want warmer or cooler whites. Generally, I prefer cooler ones. A lot of people prefer warmer ones, which are kind of a little bit yellow. And that's what white balance means. That's what this warm and cool means. Next is saturation. Saturation is, let me do something right here. I am going to increase the saturation right now and make it up all the way. Now, can you see the difference of what it was like before and now? Every single color is exaggerated to an unnetted, like it's just an unreal level. This is not what it looks like in real life. If you came and looked at it with your own eyes, it would be quite different. Now, saturation levels vary, and this is what it is. So I'm going to end it right here. So back to normal. That's what saturation is. Saturation is how much color is kind of being enhanced. I don't know if it's enhanced would be the right word, but it's being accentuated. This is what they often say, punchy colors. When colors look pretty bright, that's what saturation is. So if you have an image that's very saturated, that means it's very bright. If it's unsaturated, it means it has very dull colors. And then exposure. Exposure is how bright an environment is. So what I'm going to do right now is take the exposure all the way down on the video. So it was normal, it's all the way down now. Now I'm going to pump it all the way up so you guys can see what exposure is like. And this is what the difference between exposures. So when it's dark, it's called low exposure. When it's very bright, it's called high exposure. So that's what exposure means. Every camera has to find a balance between the low and high exposure to give you the best results. If it's too bright, you're going to start losing out details, and it's just going to become like, it's going to fade out, it's going to look washed out, as they say. And if you make it too dark, it's going to lose detail, you're not going to be able to see things, and that's not a good thing either. So you have to find a good balance between the two. And finally, one more thing he mentioned was detail. Now, detail is not something I can show you right off from this video, but what detail means is if I were to zoom in on this frame of me and look at my t-shirt, would I be able to notice elements of my t-shirt and how well I would be able to notice them? Now, a good camera will try to contain as much detail as possible. Now, that's what a quick kind of rundown of what each and every term of these means. Now, what Marques did say throughout the video was that these cameras, the photos that won, they didn't win for, their overall quality. It was mostly one aspect that made each and every one win, and that was exposure. So that means whichever image looked the brightest and looked like it had the most clear, I would say most visible image, that was the one that kind of won. And another one he did say was that saturation, whichever color looked the most saturated, whichever image looked the most saturated, tended to be the one that people favored. Now, this isn't a bad thing, that's just what personal preference is, that's what taste is, but having exposure that's a little bit too high and saturation that's too high, that isn't a good photograph. You want to strike a good balance between the two, and that is why most of these phones that lost were so surprising. Now, getting into these phones. Marques uploaded these photos on Twitter and Instagram, and Twitter and Instagram compress these photos. Compress means they make the quality worse than it is so that they can make the file size smaller so that it's not as big on their servers. That's what they do. Every single social media platform does it. Even messengers such as WhatsApp do it, and that's what compression means. Take a photo on your phone, look at the photo in your gallery app, and then send it via WhatsApp, send it on Instagram or something, and then open up the photo in that app and look at the quality. Now, you can clearly tell the difference, and that's because the image that is not as good quality, that's been compressed to save on space. This compression means that you're going to lose detail, you're going to lose clarity, and that works against a lot of these smartphones that have a lot of detail. I mean, you can say that these are just excuses at the end of the day, but the thing is, when it comes to these higher end phones, we're at a stage with smartphones where it is very hard to find a phone with a bad camera. All these cameras are very good and will give you good photos in most every situation. It only comes down to trying to find out which is just a little bit better than that, a little bit better than that. And that's where we're at right now. So that's why I'm saying taking away even that little bit of detail kind of masks what the potential is. The Poco phone was the very, very surprising element throughout this test. And another very big upset factor, I think, was that the iPhone 10, 10s, Pixel 2, Pixel 3, they were all, each and every one of them was eliminated in the first round. They didn't even make it to the second round. So the best, the iPhone 10 and the iPhone 10s Max, the Pixel 3, they're considered to be the best smartphone cameras right now. And the fact that all these got eliminated in the first round says something. Now that says something mostly to people's preferences. And the preferences are very clearly people like clear images that are bright and that have good solid color. Nothing wrong with that. And in that case, what happened was that the Mate 20 beat out the Palm, the Razr 2 beat out the OnePlus 6T, the LG V40 beat out the Pixel 2, iPhone 10s was beat out by the BlackBerry, another very big surprise. The Pixel 3 was beat out by the P20 Pro. The Red Hydrogen beat out the X2, Moto X2 Force. The Galaxy Note 9 beat out the U12 Plus, the HTC U12, and the Poco phone beat out the iPhone 10. Now, a lot of people have this very bad misconception that these $1,000 phones are a waste of money. I would just like to point out that just because you don't have a $1,000 phone or you don't want to buy a $1,000 phone does not mean that you can go around and criticize every single person who buys an expensive phone. An expensive phone is not a bad thing per se. There's a lot of features in there which are not in budget phones. You see on paper a lot of things, but when you translate the experience, it doesn't copy over. That's the point here. And people are not crazy. People don't buy such expensive phones just because they want to or just because people just don't buy these expensive phones because they're expensive. Yes, there are people who do that, but there are a lot of people who buy phones because of a lot of other factors. Now, if you guys claim that people just buy phones because they're expensive, we were clearly proven wrong with the Red Hydrogen. In that case, everybody should have been lining up to run and buy a Red Hydrogen for $1,300, $1,600. No, but no one did. The reason is because the Red Hydrogen didn't provide some of the things like the polished experiences that the iPhones, the Notes provide. It's a very good reason why they charge you that much money. That's my point here. Now, that being said, what I'm trying to get at is that the Poco phone beat out the iPhone 10, it beat out the Note 9, and it beat out the Red Hydrogen. So it beat out these three phones in a blind camera test, which means that it was not multiple photos. It was just one photo, one scenario, and I don't think there was enough of a variance to prove it wrong. And I'm going to say it up front. Hats off to Poco. They did an amazing job with their phone. It's really great. What I don't like right now is the way that the community, the Poco community, they feel entitled that just because they have they have a phone that does almost everything a $1,000 phone does. They have this kind of what they have is, I don't know how I would accept it, but they're just a little bit too eager to jump on the gun to shit on these iPhones, Notes, and these flagship phones. I can understand why people appreciate these budget phones that can pack a lot of punch, but what I'm saying is that that's not the only thing in the world. There's a reason why there's a market for everything. The Poco phone exists because there's a market for people who want the Poco phone, and a market exists for the iPhone, a market exists for the Note, a market exists for the Razr, a market exists for the Pixel. And to say that people are buying the wrong phone is not the right thing, because not every phone is right for everyone. All right, so this kind of deviated off topic and went into the phone kind of thing. So let me go back on track and let's talk about the test. So it was a very interesting test, and as I said, it was not definitive because, as I said, a lot of things were not captured here. So a lot of things that we were missing were tests such as low light conditions, using telephoto lens, seeing which telephoto lens on the cameras performed better. Now phones that have wide angle lenses, how do those perform against each other? Portrait mode. Portrait mode is something that a lot of people have started to use very regularly. They actually consider that to be an important feature, and I think almost every single one of these phones has it as well. I don't think there was any phone that didn't include a portrait mode on their smartphone, and that's something you have to compare as well. Which of the phones gives you the best experience in that? And then video. Video was not a part of this test. So what this blind camera test proved was that in a certain condition, just one specific way, the Poco phone did very well, the Mate 20 did very well. What I'm trying to say is, it's not a bad thing. I'm not bashing at anybody for winning. What I'm trying to say is you have to understand the results here. If we changed up, say we had the iPhone XS go against the BlackBerry. Now, if we switched it up and we had the XS go against, say, the V40, we had the XS go against the Razr phone or any other phone, I am fairly certain, if you switched up these, the first test, like the first round, you would get completely different results. And that's why this test isn't definitive, and that's why people shouldn't take this as the end-all be-all, or this is it, the most perfect, this is the smartphone with the best camera. That is not the case. This is just a blind camera. This test represents what most people would think is the best camera phone, in the sense what their tastes say is the best camera phone in this one specific situation. And just hats off to the Poco phone for where it got to. I mean, it is astonishing that it did what it did, but it needs to be said, the Poco phone does not have the best camera. It's not even close. It is not the number 2 smartphone camera on the market right now. That is just not true. And that's what I'm trying to say. Now, this list just doesn't mean that whatever number, the Mate 20 Pro is immediately the best camera phone out there. No, that's not the case. Yes, it is an extremely capable camera, and it is very well received by everyone. And that is something that we have to understand, and that is what I want to explain. Marques did an excellent job explaining this himself, and I just wanted to talk about it because a lot of comments I was seeing just seemed to misinterpret the entire video as the end-all be-all. It was like this is the ultimate smartphone comparison for cameras, which it wasn't. It was just a very specific kind of test with a very specific goal in mind, just to see what was happening here. Now, that's okay, as I said, and I really want to, I want to really appreciate content creators like Marques, like Jonathan Morrison, because what they're doing is they are pushing the limits. Jonathan disproved that the 10R display wasn't as bad as people said. He proved to people that the iPhone XS Max is just as good as the Pixel, and people were just blowing it out of the water. And same way, I feel like a lot of these smartphone upsets we see today, it's kind of making us reassess things. It's easy to assume that a $1,000 phone is going to have the best camera, but it is very possible that a $1,000 phone does not mean an excellent camera as well. Maybe a phone that's not $1,000, maybe it's cheaper, has a better camera. So that's what I'm trying to say. the camera of the blind phones, the blind smartphone camera test. It is an excellent metric to just look at. It's very interesting to see the results and how it all played out, but this is not something that I think anybody should be using to determine their smartphone purchase. Now, there's a lot of things to a phone besides the camera, and as D2D in Marques's video said, at this point, he said that he wouldn't consider changing his phone for just the camera performance, and that makes sense because I wouldn't either. I would not give up my iPhone for a Pixel just because it has a little bit better camera performance when it comes to still photography and portrait mode. I would not do that. I would much rather have a little bit less capable of a camera, but have the experience of iOS. Now, it's going to be the same for a lot of people. Some people will say, I don't need the world's best camera system. I'm happy with my S Pen. That's why I need the Note 9. Same way some people might say, I am looking at price, which is the most important factor to me. That's why phones like the Poco phone or the OnePlus 6T are what I'm going to go with, and not something like a iPhone XS or a Pixel 3. And this is what it comes down to with me wrapping this video up. There is a lot of misconception with smartphones, smartphone prices, and just the way smartphones are positioned. Not everyone is supposed to know. Apple is not forcing everybody to buy their $1,000 iPhone. Apple is not forcing everybody to spend upward of $1,500. And, I see a lot of people who just claim the iPhone is $1,500. I mean, it might be true in some countries, but in the US, $1,450 is the max out version of the iPhone XS Max with 512 gigs of storage. The base model iPhone XS, which does the same thing as the iPhone XS Max, it costs $500 less. It costs $999. So what I'm trying to say is that, don't just look at these raw numbers and just assume what a phone is capable of. You have to get it in your hands. You have to experience it before you can say anything. Now, that's the reason why phones like OnePlus 6T are still very popular, but they haven't been able to dethrone phones like the Galaxy S9 or the Note 9 because the OnePlus has proved time and time again that it performs better, but it doesn't give you everything. It doesn't have the best camera. It doesn't have a lot of the best features that you get from other phones, which is why these smartphones exist. And that's it for today's video, guys. It went in all different kinds of tangents here, I know today, but what I'm trying to make sense of here is that cameras in smartphones are so good right now that it is very tough to just look at two photos and say, that this is definitively better, because each camera has its own advantages. Some cameras do so well in low light, some cameras do extremely well with video, some cameras do very well with, photography that comes to portrait modes like that. So it's just it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Everybody has something for them, and that's the beauty of today's market, and that's what I'm going to leave you with. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I will catch you in the next one.